think we're getting along a little bit in time, so let's move on to our next speaker.
Thank you, Doug, and Mel, fantastic work, and to you as well, Doug, of course. And we can just dive into it on the topic of Grant Morrison's Doom Patrol. So for those of you who don't know, my name is Cole. I'm from the highly acclaimed YouTube channel Critical Rants, and my presentation is titled, give me one moment to pull it up, The Many Meaningless Merits of Mr. Nobody, or How Grant Morrison Created One of Comics' Grooviest Villains. Now, if you're a fan of Doom Patrol comics, or if you're a fan of the Doom Patrol TV show, you're likely familiar with the name Mr. Nobody, but in case you're not, just strap yourself in because things are about to get weird. Now, the Doom Patrol, from their inception back in the early 1960s, proudly wore the patch of the world's strangest superheroes, and their villains often matched their, shall we say, uniqueness. Eric Morden was one such villain, albeit much closer to the realm of the ordinary than many others. His humble origin saw him attempting to join the villainous group known as the Brotherhood of Evil by unleashing a wave of destruction after a giant red robot named Rog. With a giant red robot named Rog. After his plan, which also involved, of course, stealing the Statue of Liberty, was thwarted by the Doom Patrol, his membership in the Brotherhood of Evil was denied, and we wouldn't see or hear of Morden again until 1989, when legendary writer Grant Morrison would reinvent this one-off adversary in the pages of their now beloved run of Doom Patrol. Somewhat ironically, Eric Morden as a character was a nobody, someone practically lost to the sands of time, when Morrison decided to turn him into whatever Mr. Nobody ended up being. Morrison would explain in the pages of issue 26 that Morden, after fleeing the Brotherhood of Evil, would undergo a bizarre procedure conducted by a Nazi scientist that ultimately drove him insane, before he emerged reborn as the somewhat two-dimensional, absurdist being known as Mr. Nobody. In the newly born man's own words, Mr. Morden was gone, wiped out like a chalk drawing on a slate. I had become the spirit of the 21st century, the abstract man, the virtual man, the notional man, Mr. Nobody. Mr. Nobody would appear primarily in two story arcs across the run comprising of 4 issues each, The Painting That Ate Paris, and Mr. Nobody's infamous run for the office of President of the United States. Yet no man is an island, and Mr. Nobody's first act in Morrison's Doom Patrol sees him assembling a brotherhood of his own, one he would eventually title the Brotherhood of DADA. The Brotherhood of DADA consists of Mr. Nobody himself, as well as several other kooky characters. There's Frenzy, a man able to convert himself into a living cyclone, the Fog, who is capable of absorbing other human beings and retaining their distinct personalities within him, Sleepwalk, who possesses incredible super strength, but only while sleepwalking, and finally the Quiz, a germaphobe who has every superpower that you haven't thought of. It's a bit of a weird bunch. Now, despite the name of the new and improved Brotherhood representing meaninglessness itself, the name of the Brotherhood of DADA within the narrative is itself not meaningless, and hopefully that will make sense in a moment, as Dada is a style of art that largely originated in response to the First World War. Often described as anti-art, Dada is in focus precisely on a lack of logic, a lack of reason, and a lack of conformity, and the genre frequently invokes sentiments against war, capitalism, and materialism. Now, say what you will about Mr. Nobody, but a capitalist and a conformist he is not. This is evidenced in issue 27, when Mr. Nobody tells a policeman that he doesn't speak fascist before promptly turning said policeman into a toilet. Now, Dadaism spanned many genres of art, but it's poetry that Morrison most utilizes within Doom Patrol, with many text boxes and pages stuffed to the brim with stream of consciousness poems and wild collage-like imagery. In fact, Morrison even cited the cut-up technique as a method they used to help them write parts of Doom Patrol. Dadaist in origin, the cut-up technique involves cutting words out from a newspaper or magazine and rearranging them in a new order to form a poem. And this way of writing can even be witnessed directly in Doom Patrol in creatures known as the Scissormen, who speak entirely in cut-up sentences. You can certainly see the influence of this unfiltered approach to storytelling in Mr. Nobody himself. There is his tendency to spout his silly and occasionally musical thoughts to whomever surrounds him, But let's take a closer look at the dastardly designs of this two-dimensional Dadaist, because Mr. Nobody's goals aren't those of a traditional supervillain. He doesn't desperately want to kill or even defeat the heroes of the Doom Patrol. He isn't out for revenge. He doesn't want to use his abilities to attain power or personal wealth, and he doesn't want to conquer the universe, at least not in the traditional sense. When Mr. Nobody does take over the world, he does so by spiking a rubber chicken on the ground and proudly declaring, "There, we have now taken over the world. What are you going to do about that?" By his very nature, Mr. Nobody defies conventions and descriptions, but let's do our best to pin down his motivations here. If there's a single thesis to Mr. Nobody's actions, as he himself puts it, it's to celebrate the absurdity of life. But what specifically does this entail? Well, this entails acquiring a psychoactive painting capable of swallowing the world, merging said painting with reality, running for president of the United States of America on the platform that every day will be Christmas, using Batman as an ashtray, whatever that means, and of course, adding an extra 1.5 inches to rulers. Just to name a few. Perhaps by attempting to pin down Mr. Nobody's identity is to miss the point and joy of his character, because Mr. Nobody simply is. There's not really a reason for Mr. Nobody to do anything, but that's exactly the reason why he does what he does. Where other villains ask why, Mr. Nobody asks why not, and would you like to ride in my tour bus that's powered by a magical psychedelic bicycle? It would be easy to glance at Mr. Nobody and write him off as a collection of random nonsense words and vaguely absurd ideologies. And on some level, that is one way of viewing Mr. Nobody, as even a surface level examination of this character still reads as him being an absolute joy to experience. Say what you will about Mr. Nobody, but the guy is certainly not lacking charisma. And getting swept up in the sheer ridiculousness of his character is arguably the entire point of his character. But in my opinion, Mr. Nobody is much more than a series of gags and punchlines. And to understand why, we'll have to discuss his untimely demise. When Mr. Nobody is eventually defeated, it isn't even by
Okay.
Sorry, booted out there. What was where was the last thing that I was on before I got kicked?
I think you were
His
just
demise.
Talking, yes.
Excellent. All right, I might be retreading a little ground here. So you know, it's the joys of live television, so to speak. But I might be retreading a little ground. I'll just go right back through it.
Sounds
so
good.
let me reshare my screen. Just, you know, always nice to be on your toes. All righty, and we're just going to skip past this. And there we go. So the Pentagon sends a mystical, many-faced agent known as John Dandy to assassinate Mr. Nobody and the Brotherhood of Dada, which tragically is a task that Dandy succeeds at. In his final moments before he fades away into nothingness, Mr. Nobody laments that people didn't want strangeness and unpredictability in their lives, and that sooner or later, they'll miss what he was offering. While this wouldn't be the last we'd ever see of Mr. Nobody within Doom Patrol comics in general, it would be the last we'd see of the delightful fellow in Morrison's run. What's almost baffling is, as I stated previously, that the Doom Patrol themselves don't stop Nobody. It's only the intervention of the government that ultimately brings him down. In most superhero stories, I'd say that the heroes not being responsible for stopping their antagonist would be considered a negative. But I don't think that's the case for Doom Patrol and Mr. Nobody, because neither is interested in sticking to conventions. Towards the end of the Painting That Ate Paris arc, Mr. Nobody succeeds at bringing the entire city of Paris into a magical, many-layered painting. But in doing so, he inadvertently unleashes the fifth horseman of the apocalypse that lay dormant within the painting, and which now, naturally, threatens to destroy all of time and space. Yes, Doom Patrol comics are weird. It is through this sudden disaster unfolding that Jane, a member of the Doom Patrol who began the run devoid of purpose in a mental asylum, recognizes her own capability and steps up to defeat the Horsemen to save the day. Mr. Nobody even assists Jane in toppling this behemoth by encouraging the Doom Patrol to join hands with the Brotherhood of Dada and send her their superpowered energy to help guide her, in an act that Mr. Nobody describes as a groovy lovin' that is so embarrassing that it has to work. Mr. Nobody, as always, is correct, and the two rivalrous teams effectively end up utilizing the power of friendship to defeat a being that would have erased all of existence. Not only is that immensely ridiculous and entertaining, but it also challenged one of the heroes to grow as a character, which shows how genuinely effective Mr. Nobody is as a villain in Doom Patrol's narrative. Robotman is another character who is amply effective by the antagonist's asinine antics. As someone who is merely a brain in a robot body, Cliff Steele's main struggle throughout the story involves coming to terms with the absurdity of his own existence. Mr. Nobody calls this into question for obvious reasons, particularly when his run for the presidency gains so much popularity, which only deepens Robotman's inability to accept the increasingly strange misadventures he embarks upon as part of the Doom Patrol. I think that Mr. Nobody is such a bizarre and outlandish villain that he shouldn't really work on paper. But I think that's exactly the takeaway here. If something doesn't work on paper, then cut up that paper and rearrange the words. Carpet your comic books in blocks of awkward, dreamlike poetry. Hold hands with your enemies and run for president if that's how you want to change the world. Ultimately, there are no rules that you must follow when it comes to creating stories, and there's not one set path that you have to walk on to get where you want to go. Grant Morrison's process for writing their Doom Patrol run, much like the run itself, was not exactly traditional. In addition to the aforementioned cut-up technique, Morrison would also fill notebook pages with whatever thoughts and words popped into their head, and return to these notebooks months later to pick out recurring themes and images that they would then jam into the pages of Doom Patrol. They even recalled using a computer spell check function by writing entirely in nonsense words, but with roughly proper syntax and sentence structure. Spellcheck would then suggest an alternative for each word, and after substituting in all of Spellcheck's suggested corrections, the result was what the writer described as a run of really bizarre, disconnected poetic images. Morrison has even admitted to writing several issues of Doom Patrol while under the influence of magic mushrooms, which, given the psychedelic nature of Mr. Nobody and the strangeness of the story itself, should really come at no surprise at this point. Now, given that this is the academia panel, I think it's only fair that I end my presentation with a homework assignment, and it's pretty simple and it is multiple choice. Option A is to make a Dadaist cut-up poem. Option B is to fill a page stream of consciousness style with your completely unfiltered thoughts and images. And option C is to use spellcheck in the way Morrison did to conjure up a bizarrely beautiful string of nonsense. And then if you're feeling generous, you can share your unique poem in the comments below or with me on Twitter, where my handle is at @critical_rants. I genuinely love to see all of your strange creations, and you never know how useful those strange creations could end up being. That's it for me, but it's been a true honor to take part in this panel, and please donate if you can. And as for the rest, I just hope you enjoy what's left of At Home Comic Con. Stay groovy, everyone.